What would you do if the person you loved most became the weight dragging you under? For Emma, that question wasn't hypothetical. It was her life, unfolding in the quiet chaos of a marriage that had lost its spark. She stood in the kitchen of their modest suburban home, staring at the sink full of dishes, the unpaid bills stacked on the counter, and the silence that had replaced the laughter she once shared with her husband, Mark. 3 years ago, he was her rocket-charming, ambitious man with dreams as big as hers. But ambition doesn't pay the bills, and Mark's dreams had crumbled when he lost his job 2 years prior. Since then, he'd become a ghost in their home, drifting between the couch and the TV, while Emma carried the weight of their life alone. Emma was 32, a marketing manager who worked long hours to keep them afloat. She loved Mark, or at least she thought she did, but love was hard to feel when resentment grew like weeds. She tried everything: gentle encouragement, job applications filled out on his behalf, even therapy. Nothing worked. Mark's excuses piled up. The market was bad. He wasn't qualified. He'd try tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Emma's patience was a fraying thread, and divorce papers sat half-filled in her desk drawer, a silent threat she hadn't yet voiced. She wasn't ready to give up, but she was closer than she'd ever been. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Emma came home to find Mark asleep on the couch, a half-eaten pizza on the coffee table. Her heart sank, not with sadness, but with exhaustion. She didn't want to be his mother, his maid, or his bank. She wanted a partner. That night, she made a decision. She'd give him one last chance. If he didn't change, she'd leave. She didn't know how to tell him, but the ultimatum was forming, sharp and unyielding in her mind. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Mark, in her father's unmistakable handwriting. Emma's father, Robert, was a retired mechanic, a man of few words but deep convictions. He'd always liked Mark, seeing in him the same scrappy determination he'd had as a young man. Emma handed Mark the letter. Her curiosity piqued, but her patience thin. Mark opened it, his eyes scanning the page, and for the first time in months, she saw something flicker in his expression: surprise, maybe even shame. The letter was simple but heavy. Robert had written about his own struggles as a young husband, how he'd once lost everything in a failed business venture. He'd been jobless, hopeless, and on the verge of losing Emma's mother. But he'd fought back, not for himself, but for his family. The letter ended with a challenge. Robert had enclosed a check for $5,000, not for bills or groceries, but for Mark to invest in himself. Use it to start something, Robert wrote. A business, a course, a dream. But don't waste it. Prove you're the man my daughter married. Emma read the letter over Mark's shoulder, her heart a tangle of emotions. She was moved by her father's faith in Mark, but also furious. Why was her dad enabling him? She wanted Mark to stand on his own, not be handed a lifeline. That's when the twist came, not from Mark, but from an unexpected source. Her younger brother, Jake. Jake showed up unannounced that evening, his pickup truck rattling into the driveway. He was 28, a carpenter with a quick smile and a reputation for speaking his mind. Emma hadn't seen him in months, but he'd clearly been talking to their father. Over dinner, Jake didn't mince words. "Mark, you're my brother-in-law, and I love you, but you're killing my sister," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "Dad's giving you a shot, but don't think it's charity. It's a test. And if you fail, I'll be the one helping Emma pack her bags." Emma froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Jake's bluntness was a shock, but it cut through the fog of her indecision. She'd been tiptoeing around Mark's feelings for too long, and here was her little brother, laying it bare. Mark's face flushed, not with anger, but with something deeper: recognition, maybe, of how far he'd fallen. Jake's words weren't just a warning. They were a mirror, forcing Mark to see himself as others did. That night, Emma issued her ultimatum. She sat Mark down, the letter still on the table between them. "I love you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But I can't keep living like this. You have 1 month. Use Dad's money, find a job, do some anything to show me you're trying. If you don't, I'm done. I'll file the papers." Mark didn't argue. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the letter, and for the first time in years, Emma saw a spark of the man she'd married. The next day, he was up early, researching online courses in coding, a field he'd always been curious about but never pursued. The $5,000 went toward a boot camp, not a fancy one, but a practical program with job placement support. Emma watched, skeptical but hopeful, as Mark threw himself into it. He studied late into the night, his laptop glowing in the dark living room. He asked her for feedback on his projects, his voice tentative but eager. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The twist deepened when Emma discovered something about herself. She'd been so focused on Mark's failures that she hadn't noticed her own. She'd buried her pain in work, avoiding the deeper question of what she wanted from their marriage. Jake's visit had shaken her, too. One night, she found an old journal from their early days, filled with dreams they'd shared: travel, a small business, a life built together. She realized she hadn't just wanted Mark to change. She wanted them to change together. Over the next month, Mark transformed. He wasn't the polished professional he'd once been, but he was trying, really trying. He landed an entry-level tech job. Not glamorous, but a start. Emma, meanwhile, started therapy, not for Mark, but for herself. She learned to voice her needs, to let go of resentment, and to see Mark's struggle not as a betrayal, but as a human flaw. They began talking again, not just about bills or jobs, but about their fears, their hopes, their love. The deadline came and went. Emma didn't file the papers. Instead, she and Mark sat down with a bottle of wine, the first they'd shared in years, and made a new plan, not just for him, but for them. They'd save for a trip, maybe start that small business they'd once dreamed of. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was real, messy, and full of possibility. Looking back, Emma realized the letter wasn't just for Mark. It was for her, to a reminder that love isn't a contract but a choice, renewed daily through effort and forgiveness. Jake's blunt honesty had been the spark, her father's faith the fuel, and her ultimatum the boundary that gave them both room to grow. They weren't perfect, but they were together, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough.